This podcast is brought to you by Beamly.
Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're starting a series that's been in the works for a while now. We're diving deep and analyzing the Holy Bible, specifically the first book, Genesis, the Book of Beginnings.
Yeah, and this is a big one. This text is foundational for, well, billions of people, but there's so much debate baked right into its structure and meaning.
Absolutely. So our mission here, especially for you, the learner, is not to just retell the stories. I mean, you probably know the beats of creation, Noah, Abraham.
Right. Instead, we're going to take a more surgical approach with the source documents he gave us. We're looking at the DNA of the text, its composition, the big translation flashpoints, and crucially, where Jewish and Christian interpretations really diverge.
So this is kind of a shortcut to understanding the why and the how behind the book.
Exactly. A way to get you prepped for the rest of the series.
Okay, let's start at the top. Genesis. It covers this vast sweep of time, from the creation of everything to a single family ending up in Egypt.
Yeah.
How is a book that massive even held together? What are the big dividing lines?
It's actually organized with a remarkable amount of precision. It really boils down to two huge, distinct sections.
Okay.
The first part, chapters 1 through 11, that's what we call the primeval history.
Primeval history. So they're really ancient stuff.
The ancient universal stuff. This is creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel. It's all about the relationship between God and, well, all of humanity. It sets the stage for everything.
And then there's a shift, a big one.
A huge one. The second, much larger part is the ancestral history. That's chapters 12 all the way to 50.
And that's where the focus just narrows right down.
Dramatically. It collapses onto a single family line. You get the life stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who of course gets his name changed to Israel.
Which is obviously a pivotal moment.
A huge moment. And the book ends very deliberately with the children of Israel, 70 people in total, settled in Egypt. It leaves them as this defined group, perfectly setting the stage for the whole story of Moses and the Exodus.
That structural shift from the whole world down to just 70 people, that feels incredibly intentional, like someone had a clear plan.
Oh, it's absolutely intentional. And it's not just in the broad structure, it's built right into the literary framework of the book. The main organizing principle is this repeating phrase.
Ilea, Toledot.
Exactly. Ilea, Toledot. These are the generations. That phrase is the skeleton, the glue holding the entire text together.
I know it's used as a kind of section marker, but how does it really function across the whole book?
It pops up 11 times, and each time it works like a heading, signaling a transition to a new subject. Think of them as very specific chapter breaks in a long family history.
So it starts broad and gets narrower.
Perfectly put. It begins with the generations of heaven and earth, which is as broad as you can get. Then it immediately narrows. The generations of Adam, Noah, Noah's sons.
And then it zeroes in on the main line.
Right. Starting with Terah, Abraham's father, it locks onto that specific patriarchal line. And even when you get what seem like digressions, like the generations of Ishmael or Esau,
Right, they get a mention.
they get their Toledot, but they're dealt with quickly, and then the narrative immediately snaps back to the main line leading to Jacob. It's a really precise editorial tool.
If the structure is that deliberate, it really points to a centralized effort to put this all together. Which brings us to the historical theory about why. Why was Genesis created?
And this is where it gets fascinating and a bit controversial. It's a theory called the Persian imperial authorization.
Okay.
We have to stress this is a historical theory, but it gives a really powerful, pragmatic reason for why the Pentateuch, Genesis included, exists in its final form. The context is after the Babylonian exile, post 539 BCE.
So the Jews have returned to Jerusalem.
They've returned, and the massive Achaemenid Empire, the Persians, they've granted Jerusalem a degree of local autonomy.
But there's always a catch with an empire, isn't there? That autonomy wasn't free.
Not at all. It came with a clear bureaucratic requirement. The empire basically said, if you want self-rule, you need to produce a single, unified law code. A constitution, essentially, that your whole community agrees to live by.
And the community was not unified.
Far from it. You basically had two powerful factions at odds with each other.
Who were they?
On one side, you had the priestly families. They controlled the new Second Temple. Their authority, their whole claim to power, it all traced back to Moses and the laws for the wilderness. Their story starts with the Exodus.
And the other group.
The other group was the big landowning families, the elders. Their legitimacy, their claim to the actual land that came from the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their history was rooted in the land itself long before Moses.
So you have two completely different origin stories, one based on a lawgiver in the wilderness, the other on an ancestor who was granted the land. That sounds like an impossible compromise.
It was a huge conflict. But the incentive to cooperate was equally huge. Getting that autonomy from Persia meant they had to create a single text that satisfied both groups. This political pressure forced them to synthesize their competing histories into the single narrative we now call Genesis.
That is just fascinating. So Genesis isn't just a religious text, it's also a foundational political treaty born out of imperial pressure. But if the goal was unity, why do we still see the seams? Why are there, for instance, two different creation stories right at the start?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's why we know it was likely a compromise, not a conquest. If one group had just dominated the other, they would have erased the other story.
Right.
Instead, we see them carefully weaving the traditions together. The final text had to represent both the priests, with their focus on cosmic order, and the landowners, with their Abrahamic heritage. It's that complexity that makes this kind of deep dive so necessary.
Okay, so let's start that dive. Part one, we have to begin with the text itself.
We do, and we have to accept the reality that the original manuscripts are long gone. We're working with copies of copies. To really understand Genesis, you have to look at the differences between the surviving versions.
So what are the main textual families that scholars work with?
There are four major groups.
Hmm?
First, and most famous, is the Masoretic text, or MT. This is the standard Hebrew text, finalized by Jewish scholars between the 7th and 10th century CE. Most of our modern Bibles come from this.
Okay, that's one.
Second is the Samaritan Pentateuch.
Yeah.
It's written in an older script, and it has thousands of variations from the Masoretic text. Most are small, but some are pretty significant, theologically speaking.
And they're both in Hebrew. What about other languages?
That brings us to number 3, the Septuagint. That's the ancient Greek translation, started way back in the 3rd century BCE. It's incredibly important because it was often translated from a Hebrew text that was even older than the one that became the Masoretic text.
So it can give us clues about what an earlier version of the text looked like.
Exactly. And finally, you have the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're the oldest manuscripts we have by far, though they're very fragmentary. But they prove that different versions of the text were all circulating at the same time long before the Common Era.
So textual criticism isn't some academic luxury, it's essential.
You can't understand the text without it. And that brings us to the most famous example of that textual layering, the two creation stories.
Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. The source material says they disagree on almost every point.
And they really do. When you put them side by side, it's stark. Genesis 1 is this grand, orderly, 6-day creation out of a watery chaos. And man and woman are created together at the very end.
But Genesis 2 is totally different.
Completely. It starts with a dry, parched wilderness. God is much more hands-on, forming man from dust, planting a garden, creating the animals to find him a partner, and then finally creating woman from the man's side.
The order, the timing, the state of the world before creation, it's all different. So how does knowing that help us?
Well, it stops you from trying to force them to harmonize, which is a losing game. Instead, you ask, why did the final editor put these two distinct traditions right next to each other?
And the answer is?
That they offer two complementary portraits of God. Genesis 1 is the transcendent cosmic king, creating by divine command. That's often seen as the priestly tradition. Genesis 2 is the immanent, personal God, the potter. That's the Yahweh's tradition. Together, you get a much fuller picture.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's get even more granular. Let's talk about the translation of Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2, the primordial state.
Right. We're zeroing in on verse 2, Wahatseta tohu vabuhu. Specifically that phrase, tohu and bohu.
Usually translated without form and void or waste and empty.
It describes this desolate, unformed, dormant state. But the huge debate is about the verb. Does the verse say the earth was without form and void, or that it became without form and void?
That seems like a tiny difference, but the theology behind it is massive.
It's the whole ball game. If you translate it as became, you open the door for what's called the gap theory.
The gap theory being?
The idea that there was an original perfect creation in verse 1, and then something catastrophic happened, like the fall of Satan, that caused it to become the chaos we see in verse 2. It implies a whole lost world between the first two verses of the Bible.
But the Hebrew grammar doesn't really support that, does it?
It really doesn't. And it all comes down to the way the clauses are structured. The Hebrew in verse 2 uses what's called a disjunctive clause.
Okay, break that down for me. What's a disjunctive clause?
Think of it like a parenthetical comment.
Yeah.
And by the way, It provides background information that sits outside the main narrative flow. If the author wanted to say the earth became chaotic, that it was the next event in the sequence,
They would have used a different construction.
they would have used the vav consecutive, which is the standard way to say, and then this happened, but they don't. The grammar itself tells us that verse 2 is describing the initial conditions before the action starts in verse 3 with, and God said, let there be light.
So grammatically, it has to be the earth was without shape and empty. It's describing the raw material, not the wreckage of a previous world.
Exactly. The chaos is what's about to be ordered, not the result of a prior judgment.
Which is a key point, because those words, tohu and bohu, get used very differently later on by the prophets.
They do. Isaiah and Jeremiah use that exact phrase to describe the devastation that comes from God's judgment, a kind of uncreation. But it's a methodological error to read that later meaning back into Genesis 1. Here, it's just the starting point.
Okay, moving into the creation account itself, the text keeps repeating the phrase after their kinds. What's the significance of that?
It tells you everything about God's primary goal in that first chapter. It wasn't just about making stuff. It was about order.
Defining and dividing.
Precisely. Defining and dividing space, time, and species. The goal was to create structure out of that formless chaos. The term kind, or min, is all about establishing boundaries, separation, limits. God is creating distinct categories that reproduce true to their nature.
And the source material links this directly to later laws in the Pentateuch.
It does. Think about the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy against mixing kinds, planting 2 types of seed in one field, or wearing a garment of mixed wool and linen.
So those laws are just an ethical application of this foundational principle of creation, order over confusion.
That's a great way to put it. Creation's about distinction, and sin often is about blurring those distinctions.
Which brings us to another oddity in the sequence.
Yeah.
Light before the sun.
Right. Light on day 1, but the sun, moon, and stars, the actual light bearers, don't show up until day 4. Scientifically, it's baffling.
But the text isn't a science textbook.
Not at all. And to the ancient Hebrew mind, this wouldn't have seemed strange. They knew you could have light at dawn and dusk without the sun being visible. Light was seen as a phenomenon separate from its source.
And there's a theological punch to that ordering, isn't
A
there?
huge one. By creating light first, by pure divine command, the text demotes the sun and moon. In the surrounding cultures, in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the sun and moon were gods.
But here they're just lamps.
They're just tools. They're created on day 4 to regulate time. It's a powerful polemic against pagan worship. God creates light, the sun just carries it.
Okay, last point on the creation account. God blesses the creatures. What does that Hebrew word for bless, barak, actually mean here?
It's not just a nice sentiment. To bless, barak, means to enrich, to endow with vitality. And the primary evidence of that blessing is always productivity.
Be fruitful and multiply.
That's it. It's an empowering word. It's God imparting the capacity to reproduce and continue the work of creation. It's a guarantee of success and continuity.
Okay, so that sets the cosmic stage. Let's move into part 2 and the creation of humanity.
Now we shift to Genesis 2, which is this much more intimate, personal account. The focus is on humanity's relationship with God and the earth. Adam's formation is described so vividly. Yahweh God formed the man, soil, from the ground.
So his very name, Adam, is linked to the ground, the Adama.
He is literally an earthling. But the thing that makes him distinct isn't the material he's made from.
It's the breath.
It's the breath of life. And the source highlights a critical difference here. Animals are described as nefesh kaya, a breathing, living organism. They have biological life.
But humans get something more.
Humans receive the nishma, which is breath blown directly from God himself. That word carries the weight of spiritual understanding, conscience, a life that comes directly from God's own essence. It's why humanity alone has moral capacity.
And that unique status comes with a unique job, a mandate, to subdue the earth. What does that really mean?
The Hebrew verb is kabash. It's a strong word. It can mean to conquer or subjugate. But here, the world isn't an enemy. It's raw material. So a better paraphrase would be, harness its potential. Use its resources for your benefit.
So it's an active mandate. Not just enjoying a garden, but cultivating, mining, domesticating.
It's about actively managing the planet to bring out its full potential.
And the place where that mandate is first tested is the garden.
Right. The orchard of fruit trees, located in Eden. And again, we see that little sequencing difference. Chapter 1 implies plants were there before humans, but Chapter 2 suggests the orchard was planted specifically for the man. It's just a different narrative focus.
The focus quickly shifts to the one prohibition, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
And the warning that comes with it is phrased for maximum impact. Mo tamut.
Dying, you will die.
Yes, and that repetition, the infinitive absolute, is a Hebrew way of saying you will most certainly die. It's an absolute guarantee. The consequence is inescapable.
And this is a major point of theological divergence, isn't it? The nature of that death.
It is. The Hebrew itself doesn't explicitly talk about two separate deaths, one spiritual and one physical. It just emphasizes the certainty of death as a process.
And death in this context means separation.
Fundamentally, yes,
Yeah.
separation. Physical separation from the land of the living, which is gradual, but also spiritual separation from God's presence, which is immediate. The moment they disobey, that communion is broken.
Which sets up the event itself, the first sin.
Right. And later Christian theology, especially drawing on Paul, frames this as the fall of man, a kind of inherited corrupt state passed down to all of humanity.
But the Genesis text itself is more focused on the immediate consequences.
Its focus is on God's grief and the specific judgments, the pain in childbirth, the toil in working the ground, and ultimately exile from the garden. The concept of a universal fall is a later theological framework built upon this foundational story.
When God confronts them, his questions aren't because he needs information.
No, they're rhetorical. When he asks, "Where are you?" he's not asking for their GPS coordinates. He means, "Why are you hiding? Why is our relationship broken?"
Who told you that you were naked?
Exactly. The question itself reveals that their newfound shame is the evidence of their disobedience.
The confrontation ends with the curse on the serpent, which in Christian circles is often called the proto-gospel.
The first gospel. Yeah. God pronounces this permanent hostility between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring. One will crush the head, the other will strike the heel. It sets up this perpetual conflict at the heart of the human story.
Let's shift to the creation of the woman. This is another area with a lot of interpretive baggage.
It is. First, she's formed not from a rib, necessarily, but from Adam's sila. That word means side. It's an architectural term. It implies she's an equal counterpart taken from his very structure.
And then there's the wordplay, Isha and Ish, woman and man.
Right. Phonetically, they sound related, creating this immediate sense of connection, even if they don't share the same etymological root. It's a literary device to show their deep relationship.
What about the idea that Adam naming her implies authority over her?
This is a really important point. The source argues pretty strongly against that simple hierarchical reading. While naming can sometimes mean ownership, the way it's constructed here suggests something else.
More like discernment.
Exactly. Adam is discerning her nature, that she is bone of my bones, and giving her a name that reflects that recognition. It's an act of understanding, not subjugation.
That's a significant reframing.
It is. And right after that, we get that famous line about marriage in Genesis 2:24. A man leaves his father and mother.
Is that a command or a description?
The source argues it's clearly an editorial comment by the narrator, and it's descriptive. It uses verb forms that mean this is what typically happens. The narrator is just linking the social practice of marriage back to this foundational event.
But the word for leave, azab, is so strong, it means to abandon.
It is strong, but in the context of a close-knit extended family culture, it can't mean total abandonment. It's hyperbole. It's meant to emphasize the profound shift in loyalty. The new marital unit becomes the primary focus.
That sin and shame escalates very quickly, leading to the first murder.
It's a grim, rapid progression. And look at the wordplay in Abel's name. Hevel. It means breath or vapor. It's foreshadowing his short, fleeting life from the very beginning.
And when God rejects Cain's offering, he gives that famous warning about sin.
Yeah, sin is personified as this predatory animal crouching at the door of Cain's heart, desiring to master him. And God tells him, you must subdue it. He uses the same idea of subduing that was given to Adam for the earth.
But Cain fails.
He fails completely, and that failure leads to the wickedness that spreads until it provokes the flood. The language the author uses to describe it is just, total.
Every inclination of the thoughts of their heart was only evil all the time.
Every part of that phrase is meant to show the totality of the corruption. It was comprehensive, internal, and constant.
And it provokes this incredible emotional reaction from God. He regrets making humanity.
That's a shocking verse. The Hebrew verb is nikam. It means to feel emotional pain, to be sorry about something you've done, and it's paired with atzev, grieved to his heart. This isn't just a change of plan, it's an expression of deep, divine agony.
How do you square that with the idea of an all-knowing God?
Philosophically, it's difficult. But the text isn't a philosophy textbook, it's a relational story. The point is that human sin causes genuine pain to the Creator, and that pain is what prompts him to act in judgment.
And there's a powerful irony there, isn't there, comparing God's grief to Lamech's hope for Noah.
A very deliberate one. In Genesis 5, Lamech hopes his son Noah will bring comfort and outcome from their painful toil at Siv. But just one chapter later, God is the one who feels regret, because humanity brought him so much atzav, so much pain. The whole thing is flipped on its head.
Wow. So Noah finds favor, the flood happens, and we get a new covenant.
The Noahic covenant. It's a universal promise never to destroy the world by water again. And the sign is the rainbow. Interestingly, the Hebrew word queshet is the same word for a warrior's bow. So it's as if God is hanging up his weapon of war as a sign of peace.
That seems like a good place for a break. When we come back, we'll move from that universal story to the specific story of the patriarchs.
We'll be right back.
This is The Brief on Beamly, the all-in-one platform for content creators. So Beamly is designed to be the single platform thousands of creators trust to build and monetize everything in one place. You know, it gets rid of that constant struggle of trying to patch together a bunch of different, complicated tools. Okay, so let's break down what this really means for you. First, think of Beamly as your ultimate content hub. It lets you create, host, and publish everything. Podcasts with auto-generated transcripts, SEO-friendly blog posts, videos, even full online courses, all right there on your own platform. Second, it's a zero-fee monetization machine. Seriously, you can launch memberships, subscriptions, sell digital downloads like ebooks or templates, all through a built-in store. And here's the kicker. Beamly has creator-friendly pricing. That means 0% platform or transaction fees when you connect to tools like Stripe. You actually get to keep more of the revenue you earn. Finally, the platform is built for speed and control, and it's all powered by AI. You get an AI website builder with true drag-and-drop control, an AI writing assistant for amazing copy, and even AI transcripts and SEO tools to automate all that heavy lifting. From creation to monetization, Beamly gives you the tools and the zero-fee model you need to grow your audience, brand, and business, all from one spot.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we covered the primeval history creation, the flood, the universal covenant with Noah. Now in part 3, the lens just pulls in tight.
It really does. This is the great narrowing. The story moves from a covenant with the whole world to a very specific, specialized covenant with one man, Abraham, and his descendants. The idea is that God will now work through this one chosen family to bring blessing back to all the nations.
And this covenant, the Abrahamic promise, it has 3 core parts, right?
3 non-negotiable parts that drive the rest of Genesis.
Yeah.
Offspring, a great nation, blessings for him and through him, and land, the land of Canaan.
But the narrative immediately introduces this recurring problem that threatens the whole promise.
Barrenness. It's the key narrative device for testing faith. The promise depends entirely on having a male heir, but every single one of the key matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel, is barren, at least at first.
So it forces them to rely on God's intervention, not just natural biology.
Exactly. The fulfillment has to be a miracle from the start. Let's talk about Abraham's journey. His trip to Egypt in chapter 12 is seen as a kind of foreshadowing, a typology.
Yes, his personal story becomes a miniature version of Israel's future national story. A famine drives him to Egypt.
Just like it will for Jacob's sons.
Right. There's a threat to the family line, in his case through Sarah. Plagues are used to force their departure. He stands before Pharaoh, and he leaves with great wealth. It's the whole Exodus story in miniature.
But the defining test for Abraham has to be the binding of Isaac, the Akada.
That is the absolute pinnacle of the story for him. And it's a central concept, especially in Judaism. The act of binding Isaac is seen as so meritorious that later, when sacrifices were made, the tradition was that God would remember the binding of Isaac.
It's the ultimate act of obedience.
The ultimate act. And it's at that moment, after he proves his faithfulness, that God ratifies the covenant promise with an unconditional, solemn oath. It's a point of no return.
And Abraham's identity is sealed with a name change. Abram becomes Abraham.
Which is always significant. Abram means exalted father, looking back at his lineage. But Abraham's a play on words, meaning father of a multitude. His new name is a constant reminder of God's future promise, not his past.
The story then moves to Jacob, whose entire life is defined by struggle right from birth.
Literally, grabbing his brother's heel. And his name, Yaakov, gets twisted by Esau to mean supplanter or tripper-upper. He really lives down to that reputation for a long time.
Until that night he wrestles with the angel.
Or with God himself. That's the turning point of his entire life. The being asks him his name, forcing him to confront who he is, Jacob, the supplanter.
And then he gets a new name?
He gets a new name and a new identity, Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have prevailed. It redefines him from a schemer to someone who strives with God and is blessed for it.
And even before that, he had the vision at Bethel.
Right, the stairway to heaven. That's where the Abrahamic promise of the land is passed directly to him. And he names the place Bethel, house of God. It becomes a sacred spot for him, a place of personal encounter with God.
But even with these divine encounters, the family is just a mess of conflict. Which brings us to the story of Dinah in chapter 34.
That is such a dark and brutal chapter. After Dinah is violated, her brothers, Simeon and Levi, carry out this horrific revenge plot.
They trick all the men of the city into being circumcised and then slaughter them while they're helpless.
It's absolutely savage. And Jacob's reaction is telling. He's not primarily outraged by the morality of it. He's terrified of the consequences.
He says they've made him stink among the local peoples.
He uses that exact word. He's worried they'll all be wiped out in retaliation. But his sons just fire back with this cold justification that their sister shouldn't be treated like a prostitute. It's a raw look at the violence within the covenant family itself.
And yet, paradoxically, out of all this dysfunction, the family is ultimately saved through Joseph.
It's the great irony of the book. His brothers, driven by jealousy of his dreams of ruling over them, sell him into slavery. This act of pure evil becomes the very mechanism God uses to save them all from famine.
Joseph says it himself at the end, doesn't he? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
That line basically summarizes the theology of the entire second half of Genesis. Divine providence working through and in spite of human wickedness to preserve the promise.
Genesis then wraps up with Jacob on his deathbed, giving these final prophetic words to his sons.
Chapter 49, yeah. It sets the destiny for the tribes of Israel. And he doesn't pull any punches. He curses Simeon and Levi for their violence in the Dinah incident, saying they'll be scattered in Israel.
But all the focus really lands on Judah.
Judah gets the ultimate promise. The scepter will not depart from Judah until he comes to whom it belongs. This is the foundational text for the Davidic monarchy and for Christians for the Messiah.
But the source notes that the key word there, Shiloh, is actually really ambiguous.
It's a huge translational problem. The way the Hebrew is pointed in the Masoretic text makes it unclear. It could be a reference to the place, the city of Shiloh.
Meaning Judah's rule would last until the central sanctuary was established there.
That's one possibility. But it doesn't quite fit the context, which seems to be about a person. Other readings, based on slight repointing or other ancient versions, suggest it means until he comes to whom it belongs, pointing clearly to a future king.
A messianic figure.
A messianic figure, exactly. Either way, it locks in Judah's future political and spiritual dominance.
And the book's final scene is Jacob in Egypt.
He meets Pharaoh, and he describes his life as few and painful, calling them his sojournings or travels. He sees himself as a temporary resident, never fully at home, and then he dies in Egypt with the family waiting for the next chapter for the Exodus. The book ends in exile, looking toward the fulfillment of the promise.
What an incredible arc, from the creation of the cosmos to a family waiting in Egypt. So let's try to summarize the key takeaways.
Well, I think for me, it really comes down to seeing how the text was built. Understanding the Toledot formula, seeing the two creation stories as complementary, not contradictory, and really digging into the language, like that tohu-bohu debate.
And recognizing the different theological lenses, the Christian idea of the fall versus the text's own focus on covenant and judgment.
Right, and just seeing the power of names throughout the book. Abel, Abraham, Israel. Every name change marks a shift in destiny. They're not just labels, they're prophetic statements.
So as a final thought to leave our listener with, let's go back to that tension between divine mercy and human failure.
The source brings up that story of Abraham bargaining with God over Sodom. He gets God all the way down to sparing the city for just 10 righteous people, and then God destroys it anyway.
Because there weren't even 10, not even in his own nephew's family.
Exactly. It must have left Abraham wondering what the point of it all was. And that's really the provocative thought here. Genesis constantly asks these profound questions about just how deep human wickedness goes and what the limits of divine mercy are.
Even within the chosen family, you have deception, violence, things that push God to the brink of regret.
So the question to leave you with is this. How does this relentless cycle blessing, followed by failure, followed by a renewed promise, how does that set the stage for the rest of the Bible? It establishes this dramatic tension, this desperate need for a real lasting solution that the rest of the story will try to answer.
That sets the stage perfectly for our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us for this analysis of Genesis, the Book of Beginnings.
My pleasure. Hopefully this gives you a much richer way to read this foundational text. Until next time.